Okay, now we're going to have a little look at these. Sometimes they're referred to as strap keepers, sometimes referred to as bridge connectors, and they're used for all sorts of different things. There's a well-known wallet pattern whereby the strap goes through underneath one of these, which is why they've suddenly become known as strap keepers. When I first bought them, they were known as bridge connectors and often used on the side of bags. They would have a strap connected to them, or even a piece of a swivel clip attached to them to hold them on. Now, some of them have a backing plate, which is fitted onto your fabric with prongs going through the fabric and the stabilizer, in much the same way as a lot of other hardware that has prongs. It just, you basically line up the prongs and what have you. But this doesn't have a backing plate, so it's just on the finished item. That's what you'll see, just a simple, elegant, raised bridge, effectively. Now, these ones came with an unusual back plate, and the back plate doesn't actually match the holes. So how do I fit them? Now would have to remember that I would fit this before the lining was on, so I'm just going to move the lining out of the way, because once again I'm using the same piece of fabric to demonstrate. I'm actually going to do it at the bottom because it's a lot easier. So I would lay my connector sideways on, and I would mark where I need to make my holes. This is actually really quite simple. And then I would use my hole cutter to make my holes. Now, the one thing I will say with, if you use these, is you will need to put a good amount of stabilization inside. So ideally you'd want to go through foam and a lump of Decavil as well, ideally, to make it so that it's really strong, because effectively you're going to be holding something with just 2 screws. So let me just push those bits of fabric out of the holes, bits of foam out of the holes. So I would have added a piece of Decavil inside of there just to give this a little bit more strength. So I'm going to lay my connector on my table with the screw holes facing upwards, and I'm going to lay my fabric over the top. Now this can be quite fiddly. I'm going to take the connector that goes across the back, the washer, and again I line up my screws with the holes. Now this takes a little bit of fiddling with, just to make sure that everything's lined up, and sometimes it takes a couple of attempts. And I'm actually going to push the screw through the hole and line it up that way because it's a lot easier. And just screw until it's bitten. So you can see that's attached, but it's not fully fitted. I'm going to take this other screw and push it through. These have got quite a long screw, so it will go through, and again line up. And do the screw up until it's bitten. So you can see that's still quite loose and it's not actually attached. Now the thing I don't like about this particular washer is that it does move. It won't do once the screws are tightened up, but it's a little disconcerting with it moving. I find the ones that have actually got little slots in them little less bothersome, but you get what you're given, and this is what came with these particular connectors. Actually, this is quite a sturdy piece of metal, rather than the other ones tend to be, things like this tend to be a lot thinner. This is a much sturdier piece of metal, so it's designed to act as strength for this on the front. So I'm just going to make sure that it's actually exactly where I want it to be before I tighten up those screws. Again, if you wanted to use a piece of a bit of glue underneath the screws, you could do. I've cross-threaded that one by the look of it. let's just screw that one right in. And the same with that one. And there you have your strap keeper, or your bridge connector, whatever you want to call it, fully fitted. Again, it's just a question of marking, making your holes and stabilizing your fabrics. You need to make sure that you've got enough bulk for the length of the screws and to actually give this the strength that it needs. There's an awful lot of pressure on two little screws, and if your fabric rips, that's your bag ruined. So adding a bit of extra Decavil inside, adding a little bit of extra foam if you need. If your screws are particularly long, add a little bit of extra foam just where those screws go through, to give it some bulk, to give it something to hold on to. Again, I would always add a piece of duct tape across the back, because you don't want the backs of these screws or the backs of that washer rubbing on your lining and making a hole. But they're really quite simple to fit, and they look really cool, don't they? I love the look of these. Probably should design a bag with those on.